My math students at Longfellow always used to tell me, Mr. P, you talk too fast. One of my goals today is to be mindful of that. That being said, my other goal today is to walk you through what to expect during SBA administration from a teacher perspective as well as a student perspective, and I plan to do this in 15 minutes. Let's see how well I can mitigate these two conflicting goals. Wish me luck. Now, this first slide is where our journey begins, estimated testing times. Keep in mind that these are only estimates, and if you have students who finish early, you will want to have sponge activities available for them. If students are going to finish late, they will either make up the test at a later date or later time that day even, or they might go to the library immediately after to finish the test. Whatever your site has arranged along those lines. If this is the case, you'll want to warn the students about 10 minutes before the session is up to check their answers on previous questions. More on that later when we get to the pause rules. ELA and math have two parts. The first is a computer adaptive test that is 30 questions in length. Mostly fill in a box, drop downs, short answer, multiple choice, that sort of thing. Student performance on the CAT determines the depth of knowledge and level of complexity and rigor on the content because the test is adaptive. This year, performance on the CAT also determines the level of complexity that the student will be required to complete on the performance task. The performance task will be scaffolded this year, which is a new change. Science will be computer adaptive for the first time this year, a pilot year, meaning that the state will only be sharing data on participation rate while gathering data on baseline performance. Science, like ELA and math, is computer adaptive and has 30 questions. Takes about an hour to administer. I'd plan on an hour 15, maybe even 90 minutes, as there is a short questionnaire for teachers and students to fill out to give feedback to the state. Science is only administered to 5th, 8th, and 10th graders, 10th graders being at BHS, and the 12th graders this year will be at BTech will be tested on science. During the week before testing, I will deliver student login cards and rosters to each test site coordinator. The roster is a list of all the students in the test session with their SSID and any accommodations or designated supports that each student should have. The roster and the student login cards, along with scratch paper, are secure documents and should be destroyed after all the testing has completed at your site. Before the test session, you can distribute the login cards to your students. They will use their first name here as it's listed in CalPads and their 10-digit SSID. This year, there is no CA dash in front of the SSID. The session ID down here, that's going to be generated by you when you log in and set up a test. Your computer does not need a secure browser like the student testing interface. You will navigate to caaspp.org, that's CAASPP.org website, and look for two rows of green buttons. Find the test administrator interface and click on it. Okay, once you do that, this will bring up your login screen where you will you'll enter your Berkeley email address as your username, and your password will be the one you generated when you created your login. If you are logging in for the first time, you may encounter a pop-up blocker. When this happens, you'll simply look to the far right of your URL to this little thing here. Let me show you a blow-up of that. You'll just click on this little icon right here. It will give you a drop-down which will appear, and you'll select Always Allow Pop-ups, and then click Done. Next, you'll go to the left of your URL bar and click on the circular arrow to refresh your browser. Then you'll get this pop-up screen that has a test scheduler. This is where you'll select either Smarter Balance Summative Assessments or the California Science Test. Today, we will look at 3rd grade ELA Computer Adaptive Test. I'll start by clicking on Smarter Balance Summative Assessments. And this gives me a drop-down where I'll select English Language Arts. I'm always using plus signs to get access to drop-downs. When I do that, this will give me another drop-down. I'll click on ELA Computer Adaptive Test and select the grade level that is appropriate for my setting from the listing of tests that are available. From there, I'll click on Start Operational Session, bringing me to the Session ID page. Here's where the teacher can write the session ID on the whiteboard. I would recommend using 3 boxes. The first box is usually CA, and then the next box is usually 4 digits of some type, letters and number combination, and the third box is usually 1 or 2 digits. I'm going to take a minute here to talk about student logins at the elementary school level. Your site may have opted to not have secure browser. If this is the case, the student will not have to log in as a guest or as a actual student. They can simply go to the apps down here, select the secure browser. If you are teaching third grade, even possibly fourth grade, you may want to have all the Chromebooks set up with the app's secure browser pre-selected so that when the students walk in, they just go right to the browser and they can start typing in their information. Up to you, you know your students. For secondary, secure browser is forced out to all the Chromebooks. What this means is that when the students open their Chromebooks, it takes them right to the secure browser splash screen. Then the login screen will appear, and from there they will enter their name, SSID, and their session ID. For secondary, if you want to release the Chromebooks from secure browser mode later in the school day, when you open up the Chromebook and it's on the splash screen, simply hold down the Control, Shift, and S keys simultaneously, which will free up the Chromebook for use on other activities. Keep in mind that the students will likely get a hold of this keyboard trick, so you'll need to monitor student screens during SBA administration to make sure that students are in the secure browser and not somewhere else, which is a testing breach, security breach. Once a student logs in, they'll select yes after they review the information here and review their identity, verify their identity, excuse me. Next, they will select their test. If you have selected multiple tests, for example, if you have a multi-grade classroom or maybe you're running a makeup session, something like that, you'll have more than one thing lit up here and you'll need to let the students know which test they're taking. In this case, we're only administering the third grade CAT, so the student will click on this because that's the only thing that's lit up on my session, if you can imagine that. Once that happens, the student will get this TA approval screen, and they're waiting for you to approve their test. At this point, your screen will show you something like this scenario where there are two students awaiting your approval right here, and you'll have a choice of approving both of them at once, or you can go to the table over here and check the green marks individually. I saw many third grade teachers last year waiting until all of their students had logged in and then approved all of them at once. And again, you know your students and you can use your discretion as the test administrator to approve students in whatever manner you choose. Next, the students will see, is this your test screen? The students will check the information to make sure they're in the right test so they can review any accommodations they might have as well, like text-to-speech. We see here that this is grade 3 and it is a non-performance task, and this is the test the student is assigned to take, so they'll click yes, start my test. At this point, you are administering the ELA CAT, so every student in your room should have headphones because there's a listening portion. Students who have text-to-speech as an accommodation will need headphones on all sections of the SBA, and depending on the circumstances, students will go to the sound check. And once they've completed the sound check, students will be taken to the test instructions and help page. Most students will choose begin the test. However, they can scroll through and read information here should they so choose. I'll take a moment here to talk about the features and tools page. There's some navigation buttons here that students have access to. There's the zoom in and zoom out. You can zoom in and zoom out. Zooming out feature is 3, 5, 10, and 20 times are available. There's also a context menu available, which I'll talk about later. Over here are the back and next buttons where students can scroll through test questions that they've completed previously. Test questions are listed above. It also tells what question you're on out of how many questions. There's also a save button here for lengthier items, and this is key, especially during the ELA performance task, where I would encourage students to save often in case there's some type of glitch and students get booted out of the system. There's also a pause button here, and if the students are at the end of the test, like this student is on question 30, then the end of the test button lights up. More on that later. I'd like to focus right now on the context menu for a moment. If the student clicks on the context menu for questions or for answers, we'll go through that right now. A drop-down will appear when the student clicks on the context menu tool. The student can select the tutorial, which will give them a brief description of the question type that the student can mark. The question for review also, if they'd like to come back to it later after they've completed all the other questions. If a student with RTI or language learner has text-to-speech, they'll have the option to have the question read to them or the question and options read to them. If a student has an IEP or 504, there'll be another light up here because they will also have the option to have ELA passages read to them. Okay, on the context menu for answers, There's a tutorial option available here as well, and there's a notepad for students to be able to take notes. And this will be used anytime the student wants to, especially during the first part of the ELA performance task. There's also mark for review. You can come back to a question later with this tool, highlight selection, and also a tool to cross off incorrect answers, the strike through tool. And as the students are progressing through the test, you'll want to monitor their progress by circulating around the room, and you can also use the student progress on your computer screen. This shows you how many students are in the session. It displays what question each student is on, as well as how many students you have in your session, like I said earlier. Sorry about that. And there's also these icons over here to allow you to see what accommodations the students have. There's also a way to pause individual student tests, and the students may pause their test as well. And the teachers can also pause the entire test session if needed. Some general pause rules. If there's a technical issue, the students will be logged out of the test and they'll automatically be paused. And when this issue is over, the students will have to log in again. Any highlighted text or other student comments are left intact in this situation. The pause rules. If a test is paused for more than 20 minutes, the student will have to log back in and will only be allowed to work forward from the question after their last completed question, and they will not be able to review any previously completed work unless it's a performance task. If a student is paused for less than 20 minutes, they will still have to log back in, but in this case, they can continue forward or go back to previously answered questions. For the performance tasks, there are no pause rules. However, keep in mind that the ELA performance task is 2 parts. Once a student has completed the first part and taken good notes, either electronically or on scratch paper or both, and submitted their test, they will not be able to go back to part 1 while they're working on part 2. This next slide is a rare occurrence. If there's a 30 minutes of activity on the part of the student, meaning they haven't used a navigation option or selected an answer, they'll be timed out if they don't select OK on this pop-up. When you've completed the test session, all students are done. You select the stop sign here, and a pop-up comes up to ask, are you sure? And then you'll select OK to continue. At this point, the work that is finished will go on to another test session or the next class, depending on your site, and complete the rest of their tests during a makeup session in the library or something along those lines. On the student end of things, they will select the stop button after the last question is complete. And when they click on the stop button, this screen comes up and if they're sure they're finished, they will select yes. And if they've previously flagged any questions for review, they'll do that next. And this screen comes up, like I said, if the student has anything flagged for review, and they have to address the flagged questions by answering them in some way. When all the flagged questions are addressed, the student will click the Submit Test button down here, and they will get a confirmation screen. This is where they'll log out. We'll finish our journey with the Help Desk support slide. If you have an issue that requires CalTAC, you can call the 800 number here, and you'll receive a high priority because you're calling from a test site. If you have a student who doesn't have an accommodation that they should have, something along these lines, this is when you would call CalTAC. If there's technology issues, you can call the Tech Help Desk here. If you have issues with student login accommodations, test security breaches, irregularities, can't even speak today, etc., then you can, with these type of things, you can either text me, call me, or Vivian. That's a really good way to get hold of either of us during the 5 weeks that we have 15 sites up and running. It's going to be a very busy time for us, but we will try to be as responsive as possible. Administrators may also contact Debbie D'Angelo or myself for any issues or concerns. And that is a wrap. Any questions?